Please, Lydia, enlighten us.
Yeah, so Parmigiano-Reggiano is, I think, a name everyone recognizes, but a lot of people don't necessarily understand the differences between a product that is labeled Parmigiano-Reggiano and a product that is labeled Parmesan. They're quite different. Parmigiano-Reggiano is the original. It's the Italian king of cheeses, and it has a very storied history. There are written records of the cheese dating back to the Roman times. And then there is a lot of people think that the recipe that we still use today to create this cheese was actually finalized and perfected in the Middle Ages by the Benedictine monks in the Po River Valley of the Emilia-Romagna region in current day Italy. And so Parmigiano-Reggiano often totes that the recipe is 900 years old, dating back to that origin. So Parmigiano-Reggiano is really big business in Italy as much as it is a heritage product, something that they're very proud of, and that they go to great lengths to protect the name Parmigiano-Reggiano and ensure that nothing else can be labeled this that doesn't meet strict standards and rules. A lot of these rules have to do with where the cows are grazed and then where the cheese is ultimately made. So Parmigiano-Reggiano is what we would call a PDO product. PDO is a program that the EU has started that it covers any of the countries in there, and it legislates these protected designation of origin products. A lot of the classic foods of Europe are PDOs. So in the region that Parmigiano-Reggiano comes from, Emilia-Romagna, is actually home to the most PDOs of any region in Italy. There's 47 in total, including prosciutto di Parma, which is possibly the other most famous culinary product from Italy besides Parmigiano-Reggiano, in addition to balsamic of Modena and a lot of the mortadella, which is the inspiration and derivation that our bologna comes from, and a lot of other products that are sort of highly regarded all over the world. So Parmigiano-Reggiano, this PDO program is sort of an umbrella program, and you can recognize any product that has a PDO, whether it would be an olive oil, prosciutto di Parma, a cheese, will have this orange and yellow label. That's the official EU symbol designating that it meets all these requirements of these protected designation origins. Then Parmigiano-Reggiano is additionally managed by its own consortio. And the consortio makes sure that there's no counterfeit products and that every producer that ends up getting label and the ultimate fire brand on the wheel of Parmigiano-Reggiano is following all the strict guidelines of the PDO. So this is a highly regulated product, but that being said, I think PDOs can be confusing sometimes because there are so many different Parmigiano-Reggianos in this country alone that are sold under that same name. And a lot of times the consumer doesn't know what farm it comes from unless it's one that's labeled as such. We kind of just think of it all as the same cheese, and it's really not. It's all made according to the same recipe, the same format, and all these strict codes. So the consortio and the name itself establishes a benchmark for quality. But then above and beyond that, a lot of producers decide to make their cheese even more exceptional, or will separate themselves in a couple of different ways that the original PDO allows for. There's certain things it doesn't regulate, and that gives the producer some license to sort of craft their special unique take on the cheese. So Parmigiano-Reggiano wheels are about 80 to 90 pounds, depending on the age and the producer. And there are 3.3 million approximately wheels made per year. And the Italians consume 65% of that product. 35% of it is exported, mostly to other European nations and then us. And so Parmigiano-Reggiano really is the king of Italian cheeses. When you go to Italy, all food is highly regional. When you're in a region, you kind of see the same dishes over and over and the same products that are all made hyper locally. You can drive 30 minutes in another direction and they won't have any of the products that you just saw, and they have their own sort of localized products, and they don't seem to know much about even products in close proximity to them. Except the one thing that I would say is an exception is that you find Parmigiano-Reggiano all over Italy. Everyone uses Parmigiano-Reggiano. It is really a staple of Italian cuisine and culture in a lot of ways. So the PDO designates that it has to be made in a special subsect of the Emilia-Romagna region. So it's a part of Parma, a part of Emilia-Romagna, or Reggio Emiliano, and then Modena, a little bit of Mantua, and a small bit of Bologna. And this is where the cheeses have to be made themselves. And this is also where the cows whose milk is being turned into the cheese have to be farmed and grazed on the local feed. Another thing that's super important to these designated products is always this sense of place, not just the geographic location, but all the beneficial microflora and bacteriums that they really feel makes Parmigiano-Reggiano are ambient, and the cows sort of digest them through the local grasses, and then they're encapsulated in the milk and also in the environment itself. And so they truly feel that this cheese could not be recreated anywhere else. You could make the recipe, but it wouldn't taste the same. And so the cows have to be fed at least 75% grasses and hays from the region itself. And of those, yes, Parmigiano-Reggiano is only cow's milk. It is, the PDO specifies it has to be made from raw cow's milk. We'll get into the make in a little bit, but and I'll break that down more. But yes, it will. Every time you see something labeled Parmigiano-Reggiano, it's always raw milk and it's always cows. So there are about 330, 40 some dairies that make Parmigiano-Reggiano. And then there's about 3,000 farms that milk animals whose milk goes into the cheese. So a lot of the cheesemakers are cooperative. They pull milk from multiple sources. There are a couple producers remaining who are farmstead, meaning they raise all the animals on their property and make the cheese right there. But that's increasingly uncommon in Parmigiano-Reggiano. But that is one of the ways that some producers further distinguish themselves from some of the other dairies that also make Parmigiano-Reggiano. So there's the scale of production that can vary, and how much control the cheesemaker has. If they obviously also operate the farm, they're really controlling the whole process, the feed, the animal, the life of the animal, and then the milk itself and how it's handled before it's turned into cheese. And then the aging profile is something that can also vary quite significantly. The PDO designates it's aged a minimum of 12 months. But because of the size of the cheese and the unique protein structure, it can age quite a long time. And you'll find wheels, a lot of the more premium brands are aged a minimum of 24 months, so 2 years. But you will also find 36-month wheels and even 48-month wheels on the market. Anything above that, probably won't find here as much. In Italy, you will find some more extra aged cheeses. They just find they don't transport as well. So usually 4 years is the most I've seen here, unless it's sort of a special situation. But the last thing, and I think the most important thing that really differentiates Parmigiano-Reggiano from each other is the fact that the PDO, it's actually one of the strictest PDOs and has the most requirements. But the one thing it doesn't designate is that the breed of the cow that is used. So there's the majority of Parmigiano-Reggiano that is being made with the Holstein Friesian cow, which is the black and white dairy cow. We have our own sort of genetic derivation of it, but they all originate from those those Dutch Frisian cows, but then, you know, sort of have taken their own shape here. But the similar cow is used throughout Europe. And they became super popular after the Industrial Revolution in World War II because they have a much higher yield. So for larger dairies, you're going to get a lot more milk for cheese making. And for a cheese like Parmigiano-Reggiano, that is such a large format cheese, it takes a lot of milk to make the cheese. So, you know, this breed really took over as the predominant breed. But there are 3 ancient heritage breeds that are linked to these cheeses. And some of these cows, they believe, are the cows that they made the cheese from in the Roman times. And then later in the Middle Ages, the Benedictine monks also used similar cows. And they're all easy to recognize because they're all just the Italian word for the color of the cow and then the name cow. So Vacca Rossa is the red cow. There's Vacca Bruna, which is the brown cow. And then there's Vacca Bianco, or Bianco Modenese, which is the breed itself that originates in the area around Modena, which is in the region. So these are the heritage breeds. And the thing with heritage breeds in nature, there's always sort of this give and take. These heritage breeds yield about half the milk of a Holstein Friesian. However, the quality of the milk, meaning the amount of fat, butter fat, and solid proteins, is much higher. So it's a much higher quality milk that is more suited to cheese making, in that it tends to develop in a slightly different way. So a lot of people have recommitted themselves to breeding these animals and making cheese only from the heritage breeds, because for a portion of time, the breeds themselves, after the influx of the industrial breed, they almost completely died out and became extinct. So some people really committed themselves to preserving the breed and the heritage of the region. And they've actually, each of these breeds has their own sub-consortium that regulates the producers that make these cheese, which is a very, very, very small subsect of all the Parmigiano-Reggiano production. So the Sol de Bruna is the brown cow consortium, and there's about, I believe there's 4 producers currently in operation. There was 5, but I think currently it's only 4. And so this is very small. One of those farms is Farmstead, and they only make about 15 wheels a day. So this is it's a whole separate designation. And then there's the red cow. This is a slightly larger consortium, but it's still quite small, the production overall. And then lastly, the white cow is by far the most select and small. And they're products you can, if you find them here, they tend to be very, very, very expensive. I'm not saying they aren't worth it. They are delicious, and just the idea of preserving these breeds, I think, is really beautiful. But it's something that I think we're not as aware of here because it's not our culture, our native culture, but they're growing in popularity, especially because of some of the health benefits of these heritage animals. They have, a lot of people think it's an easier to digest product. And actually, it's interesting to note that Parmigiano-Reggiano, because of the way it's made and that it's raw milk and the amount of time it's aged, it has 0 lactose in it. So it is a completely lactose-free product. A lot of people think all cheese is lactose, but actually a lot of the lactose is lost during the cheese making process and then throughout time, because lactose converts into lactic acid in cheese making. So there isn't very much lactic acid in a cheese, especially when it's aged and dry. Some of the soft cheeses do have some lactose. The more milky it tastes, in terms of and loose it is, probably the more lactose it has. But Parmigiano-Reggiano is a great, easily digested product because of its age and the way it's made.
Lydia,
So the rest, yeah.
How easy is it to find the heritage cow cheeses here?
So you can, I would say now, especially because of COVID, there's a lot of specialty shops that now sell products online. And if you're not opposed to getting it in the mail, it's a very stable product. You can definitely find it. I actually work for an importer that imports one of each breed. And I know that we have some online customers who buy wedges of it. So you can buy a piece of the red and white cow. They're quite expensive here. They're usually over $40 a pound. So the little cuts are the best way to try it. It still won't be cheap. The brown cow is, I think you can find a slightly more affordable. There's a producer called Val Serena, which is the one whose label I had here. They're definitely available online. I've seen it. And the brown cow is one of my favorites. It's the same cows used to make Gruyere in Switzerland. It's the Alpina Bruna, which is the Swiss brown cow. They have like the really cute fuzzy faces. And they just have a high quality of milk. So they're really cool to seek out. And they're very easy to know you're getting the real thing because of all the official seals. The white cow is very select. And if anyone is watching the Stanley Tucci Discovering It or Finding Italy, Searching Italy, in the Bologna episode, they start off going to Rosala, which is a producer of the white cow Parmigiano-Reggiano, who Massimo Bottura uses exclusively, he says, in his restaurant, which he can afford to. So, but it's because of that show, it's been more popular. So it might be a little bit easier to find than it would have typically been. The Vaca Rosa, like I mentioned, there's a larger amount of cooperatives making it, still very small, but that's another one for sure. You can find a couple of different producers of it for sale online.
And the
I don't, Italy maybe. Italy might have.
Oh, of course.
I don't know for sure what they carry, but yeah, duh.
And the taste is going to be different between each breed, correct?
Yeah, and a lot of what's different is the texture. And then for the heritage breeds, a lot of them are aged longer than typical. Usually the red cow designates it has to be aged a minimum of 24 months. But often you'll find red cow 36 months, 48 months. And this is because of the unique structure of the milk. There's more of the protein solids, the casein. And so it ages sort of slower and more gradually. And so it has a very delicate flavor. And with age, it just gets more and more pronounced and intense without sort of going off. So that's a particular breed, and most of the heritage breeds in general, because of the milk makeup, they're just built to age longer. So most of those producers do age those cheeses longer. But they tend to be delicate. I think in some ways they're more delicate. You definitely wouldn't find it at Trader Joe's. That's because they do their own labeling and they sort of like to take the producer out of it. And I think just the price alone and the quantity of it, it's like they couldn't, it's not really within the scale of how they buy cheese. There's nothing wrong with what they do. It's just those types of products don't really fit into that. Mariano's, I don't think so, because
maybe more of like maybe
Caputo's, anything more Italian focused. I know Italy will carry, they might not have all the breeds at once because again, the wheels are quite large, but I have seen red cow there. I've seen the brown cow there. So they've definitely will feature the breeds. I'd say anyone Italian focused, because again, it's a very, it's a point of pride for Italians and something that, you know, that would definitely be there. The problem with it in grocery stores is that it's not, it is Parmigiano-Reggiano, but the price point that it comes in at, this isn't a cheese you're gonna grate on your pasta per se. So I think sometimes that becomes, that higher price point in a grocery store for Parmigiano-Reggiano can be confusing. So unless it's a very specialized grocery store or like one with an Italian focus, they probably will just have one parm that's good, but like a much more reasonable price point so people can grate it, shred it, you know, put it on their pasta and not, I mean, Parmigiano-Reggiano, when we're talking about the more commodity, it's still a very high-end product. And those cheeses tend to be $20 a pound. So not to say that that's cheap by any means, but when you're paying double that, you're certainly not going to necessarily use it as an ingredient cheese. So I think that's why most grocery stores don't carry products, the heritage breed products, because for their average customer, that's not what they're looking for. So, but cheese shops definitely would feature it. Or I know Italy or other Italian centric markets. I know, yeah, like I said, online, there's definitely some Italian like food product shops that feature it. And then there's some like more Italian angled cheese shops that I think would probably have it as well. But yeah, it's not something you would find in your typical grocery store, probably.
Thanks. Quick question.
Yeah.
So if you buy it online, is it safe to just buy and let's say it's a few days until you get it and who knows where it went during? Is it safe cheese to ship like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think so a lot of the product that is being shipped, depending on if you get it from a cheese shop, they're probably cutting themselves and wrapping it, but they should be taking care to handle the cheese properly. But a lot of the other outlets, it's actually like the cheese is cut by the producer in Italy into like 300 kilogram wedges and cryovac. So it's pretty like in terms of contact and everything, it's very sealed and secure. The cheese itself, being a more aged cheese with a very low moisture content, it's very stable. In the summer, it's a little trickier to ship cheese when it's really hot outside, but most people will be shipping it in an insulated shipper with an ice pack. And Parmigiano-Reggiano, I mean, I've left pieces out for days and eaten them. They get a little sweaty, but the cheese itself is, I mean, our ideas of food safety are quite different than like a lot of what happens in Europe, especially as it pertains to cheese, because aged products are very stable. The FDA doesn't always recognize that. So they're encouraged. The thing is with cheese is it needs a stable temperature. Otherwise, it's sort of like, it gets sort of abused and confused. If it gets really hot, then really cold, and then like vice versa. So the fridge is one of the only constant environments in most Americans' houses. So like for food safety purposes, it's sort of like regulated to that. But were you to have like a little wine chiller that was set to like 50 degrees or 60 degrees, that would probably be better for the cheese. It's just most people don't have that. No, I'm not recommending you do that. I mean, you can if you're really into your cheese, but for aged cheeses in particular, they're quite safe, and they shouldn't be exposed, especially this time of year, to too much adverse. But people who also ship perishables tend to give you options or make restrictions. Like you couldn't get a piece of cheese shipped to you ground from somewhere that would take 3 days. You might have to order it 2-day. You know, it sort of depends on the outlet you go through,
a quality distributor is really going to take good care of that product and make sure it gets to you in the best means possible. And if they feel that, like if they were sending it in August and they feel it needs to be on dry ice, they're going to make sure that's part of the ship.
Yeah,
that
which
cost
can
is probably going to get reflected to you.
I was going to say, which will make it cost more, unfortunately. But the foods, I wouldn't be worried about the safety end of it. I might be more worried about what it ends up costing you. But there's also the great thing about COVID for this type of stuff is that everyone has really figured out how to ship products all over the country. People who didn't do it before because it was one of their only ways to capture revenue. And so they really figured it out. And, you know, I know a lot of cheese shops who never did it before, who now have like great packaging and, you know, everything comes in great condition. So kind of one of the fringe benefits of all this other mess is that I think there's even more options for you for getting like really specific niche products sent directly to you. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if you guys have any other specific questions. I mean, there's a lot of details and nuances in the make of what is specific to Parmigiano-Reggiano, but that can be a little, I think it's interesting, but I think a lot of people think cheese is sort of all the same over and over, but it is, if you are looking for ways to recognize the product, it is very rare you'll find a product labeled Parmigiano-Reggiano DOP PDO that is not real Parmigiano-Reggiano. They regulate it. They have people here like ensuring it. The cheeses themselves has the name in pin dots on the side of the cheese. So you might have noticed that on the rind. And if a cheese, after 12 months, it's inspection by the consortio, if it doesn't meet the standards, those Parmigiano-Reggianos are scratched out, and the cheese does not receive the Firebrand seal, and it cannot be sold under the name Parmigiano-Reggiano. It has to meet certain quality standards. And then again, additional ones for some of these additional breed consortios, and they have their own markings on the wheel, on the top of the wheel, which none of the traditional PDO cheeses have. They have a special designation of that animal, it'll say vaca bruna or vaca rosa, or I think it says Bianca Modenese on the white cow. And they have their own little seals, some version of a cow head, and that gets ironed into the top of the cheese, the way the name is on the side. So unfortunately here, well, if you went to Italy, you definitely get to see the full wheels, which is really cool. But here, a lot of times we don't get to see the cut. It's just all broken down into pieces in the grocery store, but it is quite beautiful. There's a lot of care and attention to detail that obviously goes into the cheese, and you know, sort of recognizing all these different little points that make it this cheese. And but what you do find is a lot of cheeses called Parmesan, and that is different. It's a totally different product. It doesn't, even though it's derivative of Parmigiano-Reggiano, it doesn't contain either of those exact words, so they can't actually do anything about people calling their cheese Parmesan. But I think when you taste the two side by side, you know the difference. Parmesan tends to be more fruity, more sweet, and higher moisture, because it tends to not be aged nearly as long as Parmigiano-Reggiano. Parmigiano-Reggiano, I think one of the hallmarks of it is this sort of crystallized texture. You get those little crystals, which a lot of people refer to as salt crystals. They're not salt. They are amino acids, either tyrosine or leucine. And so they sort of, with a crystal like this, would take at least a year to develop in the cheese. So the more aged the cheese, the more crystals it will have. Crystal formation is pretty complicated, but it is an amino acid, and gives you that crunchy texture. And because the cheese itself has quite savory aspects, it sort of makes you feel like it's salt, but it's really just textural. If you broke it out itself, it doesn't really have a distinct flavor in and of itself. But I think Parmesan is really popular because it's a little sweet. It's definitely savory. It's got that umami factor. And because of the texture of it, it's extremely versatile and a really easy way to infuse flavor into lots of dishes. So that's why it's one of the most prevalent ingredient cheeses, I think, used throughout the world, potentially, particularly in Italy. But it's really emblematic, and you know, often impersonated, but never improved upon, I think, is something an Italian told me once, which, let's stick with that. I think that's a good way to think of it. So were there any other questions?
Yeah, anyone have any other questions on Parmigiano-Reggiano?
So that means the crystal, if you have a cheese, even if like it's a cheddar cheese or anything, that he has those little crystals.
That's a different crystal.
Okay.
So on cheddar, like when you see those little white crystals on the outside of usually a more aged cheddar,
yeah,
it almost looks like like they're smeared on sometimes. Those are calcium lactate crystals. So those are different. That's why they're smaller. They are, as the lactose is broken down, I mentioned this earlier, it turns into lactic acid. So as the cheese acquires more lactic acid over time, it sort of like weeps these calcium lactate crystals.
Okay.
And they form in these sort of strange patterns. They're a little different. There's a couple
Edible?
different.
You can eat them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're perfectly acceptable to eat. People sometimes think they're mold because they're white and they clump, but if it's on a cheddar and they feel like a piece of salt, which if you think about it, salt is a crystal, it is very similar. And in those cases, those do tend to be more aged, kind of salty cheeses. So I think that's also where some of the association of the crystals being salty comes from. But yeah, they're perfectly safe to eat. They're really just like, there's not a whole lot different from what's already in the cheese. They just form on the surface as sort of the calcium lactate builds up.
Is that kind of a proof that it's a truly aged cheese?
Yeah, I mean, it's people, in terms of technical evaluation, crystals are considered flaws, but I think for aesthetic reasons and for people's enjoyment of eating them, that they're actually a favorable quality, and most people do think the association with quality is the crystals. They really has to do more with time, but when it comes to cheese, time is money. So usually more aged cheeses tend to have more complex flavors. So yeah, it's a good indicator that the cheddar is probably going to be flavorful. And yeah, you don't have to worry about cutting them off. They're totally safe to eat.
What about, I just muted myself as I'm talking. What about an aged Gouda? Is that going to be more like the cheddar, or is that going to be more like the Parmigiano-Reggiano?
The aged Gouda is the amino acid, so more like Parmigiano-Reggiano. I think the good way to think about it is if they're inside the cheese, and they're larger crystals, they tend to be the amino acid. If they're but that being said, when you have the calcium lactate on the outside, sometimes you do have small calcium lactate crystals in the cheese, but they're smaller than the Parmigiano-Reggiano ones, it's like, you can see those like white, you can even break them out. Like they can be quite large. Those are always going to be the amino acid, the tyrosine or leucine. So yeah, I would say for the most part, if they're on the interior, they're that, but with those, if you think about the crystals in aged Gouda, they tend to be quite large as well, like the Parmigiano-Reggiano ones. So yeah, those are definitely the amino acid.
Cool. All right. What would you recommend if we were to get ourselves a really great piece of Parmigiano-Reggiano? Maybe we got our hands on a heritage cheese. What would you recommend we eat it with?
Ooh, well, Parm, it is super versatile. So I think you kind of have to defer a little bit to your own preferences, but I really enjoy it. I'm a little bit of like what grows together goes together. And I think if you can find a balsamic jelly, like one that's really from Modena, which can be quite different than a lot of the balsamics here. It's just like a really fun mix up. You get the sort of sweet, sour, savory. Additionally, I think fruit is always good with it, especially if you get, like you were saying, one of the heritage breeds. They tend to have a nice a vibrancy and a sweetness to them. So fruit is always great to punctuate it. Kind of depends on what's in season. I really like peaches with parm. I like, if you can get good fresh figs, it's also quite delicious. But yeah, and I think using it really smartly to top the right combination of flavors, it really becomes an ingredient of its own too. So I find it's something that, I think cheese always makes a dish, but there's sometimes where I make a salad and I'm just sort of like, this is just okay. And then you just shave a little Parmigiano-Reggiano on it, and suddenly, like, now it's really delicious. So I think shouldn't be afraid to experiment with it as an ingredient too, even if it's a higher quality parm. You're still gonna taste the difference, but you can certainly eat it all on its own too. So.
Well, thank you. I never thought of having it with peaches before, and now I'm excited for peach season and need to plan some cheese purchasing.
I mean, obviously tomatoes. I mean,
I know that's
often
like
topped
that's
on
the
pizzas.
given.
Like,
Yeah.
can't really go wrong. But if you think of the interplay of tomatoes, which is so classic, it's a fruit, so you can kind of just still take it in that direction.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. Anyone have any other questions before we wrap things up with Lydia today? No? Okay, well, this was fantastic. I knew it would be because it's such an amazing cheese and there's so much that I didn't know about it that now I'm walking away with more info. So thank you, Lydia. We actually have a taste talk tomorrow with Mary Ross. We will have Wine Wednesday where she will be talking about residual sugar in wine. So we're going to be talking about wines that are sweet or off dry, which are wines that have a little bit of sweetness in them. So that's actually going to be a really exciting talk. And then after that, the next thing we have is our 1-year anniversary party. And that is going to be a week from today on March 30th. 4:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. And if you have not received the information with the 2 dishes that will be prepared, which Lydia is going to demonstrate one of them, and the cocktail ingredients, the beers that are recommended to pair with the food, and then the teaser on what Mary is going to be talking about, please let me know. We want to make sure that you have the information ahead of time. So if you want to buy things and join along with us, that you can, or have them on hand for afterwards, and then you can prepare yourselves and have your own little tapas style party and invite your friends, invite your family. We would love to see lots and lots of people there next week. So thank you everyone so much. We have a lot of exciting stuff coming up in April, and I will be letting you guys know about it as we get closer to that month, which is coming so soon. So everyone have a fantastic night. Thank you again,
Thank you, Lydia. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Yeah.